Hey friend, it's me Vasco with a quick announcement. We at the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast are organizing this year's Scrum Master Summit. For tickets and details on the summit, check out the URL bit.ly/SM Summit 22. All one word, SMSUMMIT 22. And now, on to the show. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Team Tuesday. And this week we have with us from South Africa, Bevan Williams. Hi, Bevan. Welcome back.
Hi. Thank you for having me again, Vasco.
Absolutely. So, Bevan, we dive into how teams sometimes get in their own way today. But before we dive into that, we do want to know, what was the book that most influenced you in your career as a Scrum Master?
I'm influenced by recency. So probably the one that's driving me right now the most and has for the last couple of years is a book called How Emotions Are Made by Dr. Lisa Barrett. The reason for that is, the longer I've been in this space and industry and working with people, you realize how important it is to understand people and understand ourselves. So just kind of that self-awareness. And this book really, I love a bit of science. I love a bit of neuroscience. She's a neuroscientist and she talks about kind of how our brain works. And it's triggered so many thoughts on deeper understanding of how we do things like feedback and empathy within a team and just simple things like conversation, intent versus understanding. And it's all, down to how our brain works. So I think that's the one recently that's given me the most influence. Starting out, it was definitely Coaching Agile Teams by Lyssa Adkins. I'm sure it's been mentioned and I've heard it mentioned on the podcast quite a few times before. It's just a really nice, good overview of what's expected of our role.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to emotions, I mean, you didn't mention, but I'm sure that you read it and already knew it, that, of course, a lot of our reactions are driven by the emotions that we feel once something happens, right? Like when we are late or when somebody says something or whatever. And at the end of the day, as you said, knowing ourselves helps us also knowing others, understanding others. So it's a great recommendation. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, Bevan, on Tuesdays, of course, we dive into the team's world and how sometimes they develop these patterns, like these small behaviors that, maybe start small, but they start growing and growing and growing and can even spiral out of control. So tell us a story of a team. Give us a little bit of context so that we know where, is the small project, large project, etc. And then walk us through how that pattern of behavior developed over time and ultimately led to problems.
There's two stories that come to mind. And I guess, the first one was in a space that had been, working towards agility for quite a number of time. Very much product-focused teams, so not so much working in specific projects. And the scope that they were focusing on was very much in an experimentation kind of piece of work that they were doing. And the things that we witnessed started happening was, and it comes up quite a bit, I've noticed in my experience, is this idea that agility means the freedom to do whatever we want. And I think that, the wording of the manifesto is quite clear that, there is a lot of freedom involved, but there's freedom with direction, right? So like, the number one, priority is to satisfy the customer, right? So when we work in a company, when we work in a team, there needs to be some kind of purpose that we're trending towards.
So what was that the team was doing? Like, how did it start, and what was the thing that the team was doing that led you to start thinking that maybe they were doing stuff just because they could, not because it was a good idea to do?
What happened was, so during the retrospectives, obviously their experience, and at the time they didn't have a Scrum Master. Even I was more in that space as a coach working across multiple teams. So, they were seen as quite self-sufficient. So they'd have conversations, and somehow through their retrospectives, they've decided, well, the focus was more on our comfort and on our happiness. So what started emerging was they would stick to their ceremonies. They'd start changing some things as well. They would start introducing more let's get together and hang out times and let's focus on the work. They would be taking the kind of direction that the product was going in and going, well, we don't agree with that. Even though we all agreed on it in terms of a product perspective, we don't want to do that. That's too hard. Let's kind of go this other direction. This will be more fun to do from a technical perspective. So it was almost creating, in an organization and a product that, is working similar tech, same kind of tech spaces. It was kind of creating a little bit of separation away. So, not whether that's good or bad, but what started to happen was that this team started to isolate a little bit more. They became less aligned with what the rest of the teams and organization were doing. And then we started getting conflicts.
Can you give an example of one of those conflicts?
Absolutely. So what would tend to happen was with different tech that needed to happen, this team was working in a very, very short cycle of almost kind of like Jeff Patton's, double loop discovery, doing short little tests on the website of the product. But teams later on that needed to do work with that. So, that needed to say, well, okay, we've experimented with this. It kind of works, but now we need to do some longer term, deeper integration. They were using different technology stacks. So what would tend to happen is that the later team would actually have to redo all the work that was done before. And that was just causing frustration. So that conflict was literally, well, you're not helping us anymore. You're doing all these cool things ahead of time and learning, but we can't use that. We can use the information, but we can't reuse any of the work that's been done. So it's kind of this duplication of effort.
So as this started to happen, I imagine that some of the other teams started to raise their hand, if not their voice, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So
yeah.
How did that dynamic evolve?
So my role, so this is kind of where I got a little bit more insights into this, started kind of trying to understand it a little bit better, is because I was working with some of the other teams that I'd formed that were new to Scrum, new to, an agile way of working. And then what started to emerge through our kind of team metrics was a little bit of unhappiness starting to come through in some of the other teams. So frustration with working with other teams. So when we actually went to these teams and spoke to them and said, well, what's going on? What's causing this, kind of downtrend in well-being? They mentioned that it's working with a specific team. It's adding a lot to their workload. So they feel like they're looking like they're not doing enough work or not getting enough done or delivering on what they, set out to do in terms of their goals just because of this. So what we had to do was actually put everyone together in a room together and just align on this and say, hey, these things have started emerging. How can we have a conversation about this? And it was, again, it's, I think it's Hanlon's razor. So do not attribute to malice what could be more easily described by ignorance. It was that. They hadn't realized the effect that was happening down. So, we had a conversation, we made all of the information transparent, and it just resulted in more alignment. So when new technologies were used, there was conversation that came out across the different teams to say, hey, we're quite keen to use this technology because it'll allow us to gain these insights and get this outcome. What complexities might this cause later on in the product development? And that seemed to work out quite well. But very quickly, this team kind of isolated themselves, and they didn't even realize it until it was late.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what happens with these anti-patterns, right? It's like they develop over time, and because they are not looking at themselves from the outside, they're looking at themselves from the inside, right? They don't see what others are struggling with, and perhaps the others are not also raising the problems in a productive manner. Sometimes the conflict just escalates, other times it doesn't even start, right? So one of the key things that I take away from this story is this need that we have as Scrum Masters and Agile coaches to bring these different teams together, and instead of telling them what to do, to kind of say, hey, here's what's happening on this side. How do you see it? And is there a way for us to solve it?
Yeah, absolutely spot on, right? So that was very much my takeaway from that as well. So being able to identify self-destructive behaviors in a team as a systemic problem rather than, maybe it's something that's happening in one space in an organization, but actually maybe it's thematic. Maybe it is something that is affecting all the teams, or maybe it's just one team that's kind of gone a little bit awry in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really critical for us, if we're working with one team to kind of seek feedback from other team Scrum Masters and to try to understand exactly what you said might be systemic problems, right? Like for this experimentation team, there was no problem because they were doing what they wanted. But of course, the consequences were being felt elsewhere. And this is what we need to raise, right? So that they become aware of the consequences of their actions. That was a great story. Thank you for sharing that, Bevan.
So no worries. Thank you, Vasco.
Hey friends, it's Vasco again, now with a bit longer announcement. I'm part of the team that is behind the Global Scrum Master Summit, the conference dedicated to the Scrum Master role. If you're a Scrum Master, the Scrum Master Summit is the place to learn, to share, and of course to meet new friends. We will have lots of live sessions where you can meet and network with other Scrum Masters from the whole globe. So make sure you check it at bit.ly/SM Summit 22. We have several amazing keynotes, and 7 tracks that feature people like you and, of course, thought leaders sharing their insights, their knowledge, and helping you become an awesome Scrum Master. You can check out all of the details of the summit, including the keynotes announced, the track chairs, and much more at bit.ly/SM Summit 22. That's all one word. That's bit.ly/SM SUMMIT and the numeral 22. I'll see you on the conference floor.